and you can mute yourselves. So good afternoon once again, and welcome and thanks for joining us this afternoon for this webinar. My name is Evans Ikua, and I'm going to be your host today. This afternoon, we are going to be looking at privacy and data protection using ISO IEC 27001:2013. So we'll be looking at how we can be able to ensure privacy and data protection, and of course, how we can be able to ensure compliance to privacy and data protection laws by using this ISO standard called ISO IEC 27001:2013. As we progress, I'll not be using the entire name of the standard. That is the formal name, ISO IEC 27001:2013, but I'll just be using the name ISO 27001, so that will stand for that name of that standard. And the main the main thing that we'll be learning is how to achieve compliance. There are many data protection laws that as we'll see, and many other laws. So we'll see how can we be able to achieve compliance to those laws, and also performance contracting in the public sector using ISO IEC 27001. So it is my hope that you are going to learn something from this webinar, that you are going to enjoy the webinar, and that you are going to have a lot of interaction together as we go, because this being part of adult learning, it is highly expected that we are able to share knowledge, share experiences, and share different perspectives from the topic that we are discussing. It is my assumption that majority or many of the participants are basically going to be coming from the corporate world, working in companies that have to deal with issues of privacy and data protection. And some participants will be coming from the government sector, in the public sector, where you also have to deal with the issues of privacy and data protection, and also other issues, as we'll see, standards from ICT authority and standards from government that relate to privacy and data protection. So welcome and enjoy. I will request that we hold on to the questions and ask at the end of the presentation. As I've said, we mute ourselves so that you don't have any distractions. If you have your phone, put it in silent. So long as you muted yourself, that will be okay. And if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat, and I'll be looking at them towards the end of the presentation, where we'll have a Q&A session, and you'll be able to interact, and I'll be able to answer as many questions as there's going to be, and that will also be an opportunity for us to interact. So welcome. So as we go, I'll keep maybe pausing for just a minute to admit people who are coming into the webinar a bit late. So I hope you are going to bear with me on that. So the learning objectives for today is to understand the fundamentals of the Data Protection Act of 2019 and the European Union GDPR. We'll understand what the data protection is all about. I'm sure a majority of us already know that the data protection is already in place. Many of you might be aware of the European Union General Data Protection Regulation. So we'll be looking at that. Then we'll be looking at privacy information management systems and how that can be implemented using ISO IEC 27701 of 2019, which is a very, very new standard that has been put in place to guide organizations that are planning to implement privacy information management systems. Then we'll also want to understand the government information security standards and also performance contracting in the public sector. Those in the public sector, of course, will understand that more easily. Government information security standards are those standards coming from the ICT authority that are targeted at public sector entities. Then we'll be looking at the fundamentals of ISO IEC 27001:2013. So our objective here is to learn where does ISO 27001 come in as far as privacy and data protection is concerned. That is what we'll be looking at. Many of you might already, especially those in the public sector, might already be implementing ISO 27001. Even in the public sector, there is quite a number of organizations that are implementing ISO 27001 from the perspective of implementing information security management systems. Then at the end, we'll look at a mapping of how ISO 27001 maps to the requirements of privacy and data protection laws and the performance contracting in the public sector. So we'll try to take all those regulatory requirements and see how those can map to ISO 27001. So moving on, as I said, my name is Evans. I'm the one who's going to be presenting this afternoon. Those are just some of my qualifications plus the work experience, the kind of organizations that I've worked at. So I've over 20 years experience in business and IT, and most importantly, and in particular for this particular webinar, I'm a PCB certified trainer and a senior ISO 27001 lead implementer, and also a provisional auditor for the same. So those are some of the organizations who have conducted projects that relate to the topic that we are dealing with. Maybe you'll be able to look at that in detail later when I share this webinar, a link to this webinar, and also the presentation, because I'll be able to share this with everybody later. So I'm sure all of you know Edward Snowden, the infamous hacker, and somebody who has put a lot of organizations and governments and individuals in trouble because of privacy. And I would just want to start with that quote that he made, that privacy is not about something to hide, but something to protect. So the reason why we have the data protection laws is basically to protect the privacy of individuals. That is why lately we have seen a lot of explosion of data protection laws all over the world. The Data Protection Act that we have right now is by no means the first data protection regulation or law in the world. It is actually coming in quite a bit late because in many other jurisdictions, like we've seen the European Union, you already have the GDPR, we already have other data protection, like the Data Protection Act in the UK. We have a lot of data privacy and data protection laws out there in other areas of the world, like the US, Australia, Japan, and a lot of European countries. So all these have come about because there has been seen that there is a need for governments to help in protecting the privacy of technology users. And the reason why that protection has to be done, has to be regulated, as we'll see, is because there is a lot of information that we share with organizations, with companies out there. And as data subjects or as the owners of that data, we normally don't know exactly how that data is used. We normally don't understand what kind of data should be collected from us and what data cannot be collected from us. And sometimes that data can be sold without our knowledge. And because of this, it has been seen as important for there to be laws or regulatory frameworks that protect users who might be many times unsuspecting of what organizations are trying to do with their data. So what kind of personal data are we talking about? Many times the personal data is normally referred to as PII, or personally identifiable information. And this is information about names of people, your name, your address, your age, your sex. All these many times would be details that you fill in websites. Like if you can remember when you're registering for this webinar, you are required to register in our website, and we collect your name and your phone number and that kind of thing, maybe the company where you work from, and all this becomes your personal information. So some information that might not be very, very obvious that is personal is information like information that is normally collected by websites without our knowledge. This is information like our website browsing history, the sites that we have visited, the IP address of our computer, and all this is information that can be collected without our knowledge. So laws then would come in place to ensure that if a website is going to collect, to drop cookies in your computer to collect information about your browsing history, then they have to let you know that they are doing that, and you have to agree for them to collect that information. Your car registration number as may be collected by maybe CCTV cameras or vehicle tracking software like the traffic system that we have in Nairobi. All that is personal information. There is a lot of personal information that is collected by, as we'll see in a short while, by civil registries in government, Ministry of Lands, Registry of Persons, Registry of Births, and all that is personally identifiable information that needs to be protected. And as you, as the owner of that information, needs to have adequate knowledge about what information has been collected from you and what it is being used for and where it is being stored. And that is basically the essence of the Data Protection Act, to ensure that you understand what rights you have as far as your personal data is concerned, and to give obligations to the companies or organizations that collect that information to ensure that that data is collected and stored in a safe way, and it is not used for the purposes for which it was not collected for. So as I've mentioned, we have a lot of data that is all over. You go to hospital, they collect your personal data. They collect and store your health data. Banks will have your financial institutions, as will circles, as you apply for loans, as you do your transactions. They will know who you transact with, what kind of transactions you make, and that kind of thing. Mobile lenders, even the mama mboga will normally have your financial information, your consumption habits, and that kind of thing. Sometimes, remember, you pay them using your M-Pesa platforms or mobile money platforms. Traffic monitoring systems, the Huduma number, of course, CRB, all educational institutions will have your personal data. CCTV cameras, whether it is at home, whether it is maybe in the supermarkets or in companies, in businesses, in buildings, all that information is part of your personal data. Biometrics, for those who log into, who get physical access into buildings using biometrics like fingerprint scanning, the security guards when you go and sign their registers when you're entering into buildings. Sometimes they'll get your national ID card number, they'll get your phone number, and of course your full names and that kind of thing. Have you ever thought about cab hailing apps and delivery apps who have your details of your consumption, of where you live, the people that you normally deliver things to, your business partners, all that, and a lot of other information that is collected by social media networks, like YouTube viewing history and your browsing history. All that, it becomes your personal data. And as you can see, your personal data is everywhere. It is all over the world with everybody. And it is in your best interest that you understand this and you know. And of course, then you get guided by a law or a regulation that is going to help you protect the data that is going to be collected by those organizations. So I don't know whether every time you want to log into a website, or you are leaving your details in a website because you want to log in and access some services, maybe in a social media, they'll always ask you whether you understand, accept, and agree to the terms and conditions of that service. And many times, many people normally just click, you click you check the box and you say you understand and accept those terms and conditions. But do you ever take time to read and understand exactly what those terms and conditions are? The truth of the matter is that it's a very, very small percentage of people who normally do that. Very, very few people will ever try to change their privacy settings on social networks. Now, the end result of this is that a lot of those social networks and even a lot of those websites might be using your data for reasons that you have not accepted or assented to. So for all those social networks that are normally free of charge, because for all users, I don't think there is a user who pays to use Facebook or to use Google and that kind of thing. So the rule of thumb is that if you are not paying for it, then you just know that you are the product. So what these social networks will normally do is they'll take your data, they'll apply analytics to it, and then they'll sell advertising space or advertising to their clients. So for them to do that, they have to share a lot of data with those clients. They have to analyze your data in ways that you'll never understand and maybe in ways that you never accepted. And again, because it is widely known that this happens, of course, the data protection, the privacy and data protection laws come in, they kick in, and there is a regulator who's there to make sure that all these controllers and processors of personal data are held into account, and they do not do things that are going to be over and above what they have said they are going to do with the data that they collect everywhere. So for instance, in July 2019, Bulgaria, which is a country of 7.1 million people, had the personally identifiable information of 5 million of its citizens hacked. This was in the Bulgaria Revenue Authority. That is more or less the equivalent of the Kenya Revenue Authority in Bulgaria. And you can imagine if 5 million records of citizens are stolen, how much information is going to land in the wrong hands. Information about salaries, about tax returns, about addresses, dates of birth, ID numbers, and that data now can be sold to other people who really would make a lot of use for that data to be able to put together solutions and services around that, the information that they're going to get out of that, so that they can be able to make money. So at the end of the day, we know that it's impossible, it's virtually impossible for us to say that data will not be lost at some point, or a company will not get hacked at some point. But when we have regulations that ensure that organizations are going to put in place certain controls, then you end up reducing the incidences of data loss, the incidences of data being hacked and being stolen, and people losing their data. So laws become very important and critical in helping organizations to prevent these, and also in helping users to ensure that their data doesn't get lost, doesn't get stolen or lost when it's being held by data controllers and data processors. So in that case, what we have in Kenya, last year, the Data Protection Act was enacted after quite a bit of time of it being a bill and going to enforce a lot of deliberations. Finally, it got enacted in 2019. And this act basically gave life to Article 31 of the Constitution, which guarantees the privacy and the privacy of individuals. And when you look at the Kenyan Constitutional Article 31, you'll find that every person has the right to privacy, which includes the right not to have information relating to their family or private affairs unnecessarily required or revealed, or the privacy of their communications infringed. This is basically what we are going to be looking at. As we look at the Data Protection Act, and as we look at the privacy and the protection of that personal data, then this is basically what the source of all this is, because the Constitution has recognized that every person has a right to privacy. Every person has a right to ensure that they do not have their data relating to their family or private affairs unnecessarily required. So the act then, or the law, has put in place mechanisms to ensure that it is only data that is necessary, that is required, and when that data is required by the data processors, from the data subjects or from the data owners, then that information will not be revealed unnecessarily to other parties who are not part of the reason why that data was taken from the data subject. And of course, it will also go a long way in ensuring the privacy of communications of data subjects. So this act establishes the Office of the Data Commissioner. If you've been following the news, you will know that we are one step away from having a data commissioner. According to the act, a data commissioner has already been, we've already gone through the process of bringing a data commission on board through the Public Service Commissioner. Candidates were interviewed, and one of the candidates was selected and nominated by the president. The last step is for that person to go through parliamentary vetting, and once they pass, then, and it's a she, then she'll become the data commissioner. And once she gets into office, the next thing, of course, is going to ensure that that act is fully operationalized. And once that act becomes fully operationalized, then all the things that are in that act are going to be required for the companies or organizations that are meant to be regulated by this act. These organizations are the data controllers and the data processors, the people who collect and process data from the data subjects. And those are basically the people who are going to need to put in place mechanisms and controls that are going to be compliant or to meet the compliance of the Data Protection Act. Now, the Act also makes provision for the regulation of the processing of personal data and provides for which are the rights of data subjects and which are the obligations of the data controllers and data processors to ensure that those rights of the data subjects are enforced and taken care of. So some of the new terms that we need to start getting very much used to, even as we wait for the data commissioner to come in and operationalize the act, is of course we'll be hearing a lot about the data commissioner. This is a person who's going to have a lot of clout. The amount of clout that this particular holder of the office is going to have is immense, because dealing with data that is held all over is a very, very, very big thing. If you may have followed the issues around data protection and privacy, you will see, for instance, big multinationals like Google and Facebook have been fined very, very, very big fines, especially in Europe and even in other parts of the world, because of infringing on the requirements for data privacy and data protection laws in those countries, especially the GDPR. So these become very, very high profile cases, and the data commissioner therefore becomes a very, very prominent person in the industry and in the country. Then you will get to understand, to know that there will be data protection officers. Companies are required now to have data protection officers, and in a short while you see what a data protection officer will be doing. You will understand, or you'll get to hear a lot about data controllers, data processors, data subjects, personal data, data protection impact assessments. You'll hear a lot about compliance. You'll hear a lot about personal data breaches, profiling, encryption. All these are risk assessments, data protection by design. All these are the issues that are being put forth in the Data Protection Act, and they are going to be very, very commonplace as this act is fully operationalized. So the data commissioner will be coming and basically oversee the implementation of the entire act. They'll register the data controllers and data processors, and they will ensure that those controllers and processors comply with the law. Because of time, I'll not go through this bit by bit, but I'll share the presentation at the end so that you can be able to go through these in detail. The data protection officers, of course, will interface between the data commissioner and the company. So every company that is going to be registered as a data controller or a data processor is going to be required to have a data protection officer. That data protection officer is going to be a role that can be assigned to anybody who's already existing in that organization, maybe a director of IT or a chief information officer or a security manager and that kind of thing. So these are the rights of the data users. So if you are a user, these are the rights that you have as far as the personal data protection is concerned. And these are the rights that organizations need to make sure that they have put mechanisms in place to ensure that these rights of the data subjects are taken care of. Right to be informed that your data is being collected, right to access that data, right for correction of wrong information, the right to be forgotten, right to data portability in case you want to take your data back or transfer your data to another data processor. And to be able to meet those rights, organizations are going to have to meet these principles of data protection, protection of the integrity and confidentiality, limitation of storage, data minimization of only collecting the data that they need to do or whatever they need to do lawful, in a lawful way, and that the data is accurate. So what you need to do as an organization in terms of protecting the rights of the data subject, you need to update your internal procedures to ensure that data subjects can readily exercise the rights that they have gotten under the Act. You need to analyze your business processes. You need to develop standard format response letters and a lot of other things that you need to do. So one has to go through these, the Data Protection Act, and in a short while you'll be seeing how now the standards can help you to implement these. So you're able to get to meet all the compliance requirements and ensure that you've done everything that you're required to do. For internal accountability, you need to have a comprehensive data protection compliance program, and that is the program that we see can be implemented by the ISO standards or using the ISO standards. Then when you look at the section 74 of the Data Protection Act, it says that the data commissioner can issue guides and codes of practice. She can issue sector-specific guidelines, data certification standards, and data protection seals and marks. So when you look at the data certification standards and the data protection seals and marks, that now speaks to the standards that we're talking about, so that the data commissioner can now come in and say a certain standard is the one that is going to be used for organizations to meet the requirements of the Data Protection Act, or a certain kind of a mark or a seal is the one that is going to be given to organizations that comply or show compliance to having met the requirements that are given in the Data Protection Act. And for instance, like the ISO standards are certification standards, and the mark that you get out of being certified as ISO compliant is becomes a mark that the data commission can easily say, this is the kind of mark that is going to be used for showing compliance. I'm not saying that those are the marks that are going to be used, but these are just examples of the kind of marks that the data commissioner can come in and specify to be used to show compliance. So again, we have the Kenya ICT Authority standards. These are very common for those people in the public sector. The Kenya ICT Authority has its own IT governance standards, which speak a lot to information security. Basically, when you look at them, as we'll see, they talk about information security management, legal and regulatory requirements, laws, other laws on ICT, defining roles and responsibilities, risk management, and defining risk frameworks. Now, all these are basically issues that are normally handled within the ISO standards. When you compare these to ISO 27001, all these are normally taken care of within that standard. Then the other laws, an example of some of the laws that are in Kenya that touch on ICT and ICT security or information security, there are very many. And this basically brings out a problem because there are so many laws that touch on information security and privacy. It becomes a minefield of which one should you do, which one should you start with, how are you going to show compliance? And this list is not exhaustive. There are very, very many even guidance notes and all that that cannot fit in this particular presentation that we wouldn't have time to go through. So how then do we match all these together with the Government of Kenya performance contracting, which specifically talks about implementation of information security management systems? And as you can see, for those in the public sector, when you look at the performance contracting as far as safety and security measures are concerned, protection of information, equipment, and assets, you're basically talking about implementing information security management, and you're basically talking about implementing implementing ISO 27001. So what we want to do right now is to see how do we connect ISMS, ISO 27001, privacy information management systems, and the data protection, privacy and data protection law. So when you look at the privacy information management systems, as you've seen, there are so many regulatory requirements that you need to meet. And if you are to get audited against all those regulatory requirements and laws, the cost will be very, very high. On top of that, you need to show compliance to your regulators and to your business partners and stakeholders that you have complied to all those regulatory requirements, all those laws, and a lot of other standards that you have been given. And the only way to do that is to have an integrated compliance program. In this case, what we are saying is you can have a privacy information management system that is based on ISO IEC 27001, 2019, and that on top of that, ISO 27701, which is a privacy information management system, is based on the ISMS standard, which is ISO 27001. So if you can implement an ISMS and get certified to ISO 27001, then you are able to show compliance. And by doing that and integrating that with the performance information management system, then you're able to meet all the laws that you have, and we'll see how all that stacks up. So first of all, let's quickly look at the privacy information management system, which is done using ISO IEC 27701-2019. Of course, you can be able to have a privacy information management system, not necessarily aligned to ISO 27701. But if you do it based on ISO 27701, then you're able to map to ensure that your privacy information management system maps to various regulations. And because it is built on top of ISO 27001, then you're able to now ensure that your information security management system meets the requirements of privacy and the requirement of data protection laws. So this is because it is generally agreed that you cannot have privacy without security. For you to enforce privacy for personal data, it basically boils down to securing that personal data. So what this standard does is basically to add new specific controls to bridge the gap between information security and privacy. It adds, it bridges the gap between ISO 27001 for SMS and what the requirements of information for privacy information management systems are. And you end up getting those two management systems being integrated into one so that you do not have to implement one and then implement the other. And it might also be important for me to note right now that ISO 27701 is not certifiable yet. In as much as it is based on or is an extension of ISO 27701, the only standard here that you can be able to get certified on is ISO 27001. So if you need to be able to show compliance, then it is only ISO 27001 that you can be able to get externally audited by a third party or by a certification body and have a certificate that says that you are ISO compliant as far as information security management system is concerned. So as I said, the 27701 will provide the additional PIMS specific requirements. And the way it does that is to ensure that everywhere where we have the term information security in ISO 27001, that term is substituted with the term information security and privacy. So you're taking ISO 27001 and adding the word privacy to all the controls. So it's basically the same controls that you're implementing. If you already have an information security management system in place, or you've already been implementing one, all you need now to do is to ensure that everywhere you're talking about protecting information security, you're adding privacy to that, and you will have met the requirements of ISO 27701. And by extension, we'll be having a privacy information management system. And the end result will have complied with the requirements of the Data Protection Act and other regulations. So just to now understand this very, very clearly, these are the clauses that we normally have under ISO 27001. If you want to learn more about ISO 27001, you can listen or watch my other webinar that I did last month, I think last month, but one. It outlines the requirements and how ISO 27001 works. So you'll understand that from clause 4 to clause 10 of ISO 27001, including Annex A, those are normally the mandatory requirements that you must implement. Everything that is outlined there, you have to implement. But when it comes to the implementation of Annex A controls, where we have 114 controls, then it is for you to select which controls to implement based on what your organization does. If there is a control that your organization doesn't have a process that relates to, then you don't have to implement that, so long as you're able to clearly identify that and provide reason for not implementing that in your statement of applicability. Those are issues that are covered in the ISO 27001 webinar. So what we'll be looking at right now is how do these mandatory requirements map to ISO 27701 and onto data protection and privacy. So looking at clause 4 of ISO 27001, It talks about understanding the organization and its context, and it talks about understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. This is one of the key areas where an organization is, your SMS now directly connects to a privacy information management system, because as you're implementing your SMS, you are required to determine what the external and internal issues are, and you're required to consider all the laws that touch on the organization, that laws that the organization must comply to. And then as you do this, you'll definitely be looking at data protection, you'll be looking at privacy, computer crimes, digital signatures, all these laws that we've talked about that we'll see in a short while. You'll have to be looking at all those, and a major part of that is data protection. So this is a direct connection between ISO 27001 and ISO 27701. Then the next connection is control 18.1 of ISO 27001, which directly talks about compliance with legal and contractual requirements. The objective here is normally to avoid breaches of legal, statutory, regulatory, or contractual obligations related to security and security requirements. And the control is, as you can see, the objective clearly is about privacy and protection, or protection of personally identifiable information. And the control that you're required to put in place here is around the personally identifiable information, ensuring that all required legislation and regulations where applicable are taken care of and are implemented, and you're able to comply to that. So looking at all that regulatory landscape, you'll realize that there are so many laws. When you think about all those laws that I've talked about, the Kenyan laws, there are also international laws like the GDPR, Sarbanes-Oxley, the Health Information Portability Act that relates to healthcare providers, best practices like ISO standards and COVID, industry standards like PCI DSS that industry organizations that are in the financial industry, processing credit card data need to comply to, and a lot of other requirements for government of Kenya standards, like the ICTA standards and performance contracting. That becomes a very, very big landscape, which an organization really needs to comply to. And the best way to do that is by implementation of information security standards. So this is how now we can be able to directly map, look at ISO 27701 and see how it maps to ISO 27001. So starting from clause 5 of ISO 27701, you realize that it basically talks directly to clauses 4 up to 10 of ISO 27001, as we've seen a few slides ago. So it talks about the requirements of ISO IC 27001 2013 mentioning information security, and those being extended to the privacy, to protection of privacy as potentially affected by the processing of PII. So the sub clauses in ISO 27701, 5.2 up to 5.8 are basically the clauses of ISO 27001, clause 4 up to clause 10. So you're basically taking everything that is in clause ISO 27001, clause 4 up to 10, which are requirements, and adding privacy to everywhere that you have information security. That's all that does as far as ISO 27701 is concerned. When you look at clause 6 of ISO 27701, it now maps the controls in Annex A of ISO 27001, which also directly talk to the guidelines of ISO 27002 and creates the sub clauses for ISO 27701. So again, this is ISO 27001, the 14 control classes in Annex A, and all those are taken. And again, anywhere that you have information security being mentioned, you extend that with the protection of privacy, because that is what is relating to protection of personally identifiable information. So basically, this also shows you that ISO 27701 for privacy information management system is basically ISO 27001, just adding the word protection of privacy or privacy as applicable. Then the other things that it adds, as we've mentioned earlier, is the additional guidance for the controllers of personal data, the PII controllers, and for clause 7 and for clause 8, additional guidance for PII processors. So these are the subclauses again that are added. Basically, these are the only issues that are now added onto ISO 27001. These are the clauses or the subclauses that you will not find in ISO 27001, and they only relate now to controllers and processors of personal data. So that basically tells you that ISO 27701 is basically ISO 27001 with just a very, very few items added to ensure that your ISMS now is in a position to protect personally identifiable information, or basically ensure privacy and the protection of personal data. So in conclusion, if you want to attain compliance to privacy and data protection regulations, what you need to do is to implement a privacy information management system, and you can be able to easily do that using ISO IEC 27701. If you want to be able to demonstrate to the regulator or to your business partners and other interested parties that you have met those requirements, then you can ensure that you have implemented your SMS in compliance to ISO 27001 2013. And of course, you've gotten that certified by an external auditor. And once you do this, the bottom line is that you'll be protecting your shareholder value or stakeholders for that matter. You'll be protecting your assets. It will help you to cut costs, protect public interest, for instance, like civil registries. You'll be able to monitor and measure your processes where you are required to have monitoring and evaluation, and you'll be able to protect your brand against bad reputations, especially when security incidences happen. So in a nutshell, this is how it would look like. At the top, what people or your stakeholders will see is a certificate that says that you are ISO 27001 certified. Below that, and that is for you as far as your SMS is concerned. Below that, you'll be having a privacy information management system based on ISO 27701, which of course is built on top of ISO 27001. And below that, you'll have all the regulatory requirements, the DPA, GDPR, ICTA standards, performance contracting, and all that. You will have met all those requirements and all those other laws and regulatory requirements. And of course, you'll be able to protect your shareholder and stakeholder value. So thank you for attending the webinar. If you have any inquiries, I'll take a few questions. I know we have really overshot our time. I was hoping this would go for about 30 or 40 minutes. So I'll take a few questions. If you can put some questions in the chat, I'll take a moment to just look at those. You can send me questions on that email address, or you can give me a call, and you can go to YouTube to look at the other webinar that I did on ISO 27001. Even this one I'm going to put together and put on YouTube so that you can be able to watch, even as I share the slides that I'm using. So thank you. You